Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we'll present an overview of the Gemara and Tosfos in Masechta Shabbos on Daf Vav Amud Aleph and Daf Vav Amud Beis. Let's begin by looking at a general outline of this class. So in this Gemara, we asked 4 questions on the part of the Brisa that discussed the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. In the previous Gemara, we presented a Brisa that taught about the 4 Rishuyos of Shabbos: Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashanah, a Carmelis, and a Mokim P'tor. In this Gemara, we asked 4 questions on the first part of the Brisa, the part that discussed Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah, and the din related to the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah. And on this piece of Gemara, there are 6 Tosfos. So let's see the overview of the Gemara, and then we'll move on to the Tosfos. So here we have the 4 questions of the Gemara, and we'll briefly go through them. In the first piece of the Gemara, we asked why the part of the Brisa that gave examples of Rosh Hashanah concluded and said, Zuhi Rosh Hashanah, this is the Rosh Hashanah. What's the Brisa excluding when it says this is the Rosh Hashanah, the examples we gave, and not something else? What's the something else? We also explained why the Brisa says Zuhi Rosh Hashanah Gemura. Why does it add the word Gemura? The next part of the Gemara, the next question was on the next part of the Brisa, which gives examples of Rosh Hashanah, and also there the Brisa concludes and says Zuhi Rosh Hashanah Gemura. And once again, the Gemara asks, why does it say Zuhi Rosh Hashanah? What's it excluding? What case is not a Rosh Hashanah? And also, why does it add the word Gemura? Zuhi Rosh Hashanah Gemura. The next part of the Gemara asks why the Brisa, when it counts examples of Rosh Hashanah, why doesn't it count the desert, the Midbar, as Rosh Hashanah? We find that there's another Brisa that gives examples of Rosh Hashanah, and it counts the examples of our Brisa and adds on the Midbar, a desert. Why doesn't our Brisa say that a desert is an example of Rosh Hashanah? And the fourth and final part of the Gemara is we ask on the din of the that's mentioned in the Brisa. The Brisa says that if a person transfers between the Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah in either direction, if he did it b'shegig, he's chayav a korban chatas, and if it was done b'mezid, he's punished with karas or skila. The Gemara asks, b'shegig chayav chatas pshita, this that if the person was mechal Shabbos in such a way, if he did it b'shegig, he's chayav chatas, it's obvious. Why does it have to be taught to us? So this is an overview of the 4 parts of the Gemara, the 4 questions that are asked. Now we'll move on to the Tosfos part of this Gemara. So the first Tosfos is on the Gemara's answer, why it says Zui Rosh Hashanah, this is the Rosh Hashanah. What's it excluding? And we said it's excluding the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda that's mentioned in a Brisa. And we quoted the second half of the Brisa, beginning with the words Yeser al Kain Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said even more in the second half of the Brisa than what he says in the first half of the Brisa. And in the second half of the Brisa, Rabbi Yehuda says that if there are 2 houses along the street, the area in between is a Rosh Hashanah. Since in order to become a Rosh Hashanah, all that's necessary, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is 2 walls. And that's what the Brisa is saying. This is a Rosh Hashanah. The cases that we counted, but not the case of Rabbi Yehuda, because the Brisa holds that 2 walls is not enough to make a Rosh Hashanah. So there's 3 parts to this Tosfos. Number 1, Tosfos explains what's the Yeser al Kain. We start off by quoting the Brisa. The first words that we quote, it's in the middle of a Brisa, is Yeser al Kain, even more than what Rabbi Yehuda said in the first part of the Brisa. He says in the second part of the Brisa. So Tosfos explains what's more about the second part of the Brisa than the first. So he quotes the first part of the Brisa and explains what's more in the second part. So Tosfos is explaining to us words in the Gemara. We read the words Yeser al Kain. We don't necessarily have a question, but Tosfos explains to us what those words mean. The next part of Tosfos explains why we didn't bring a Mishnah. Here we say that we're excluding the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda, where he says 2 walls make a Rosh Hashanah, and we quote the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda from a Brisa. The question is that we have the same teaching, it seems, from Rabbi Yehuda in a Mishnah. If we have a choice between a Brisa and a Mishnah, we should choose a Mishnah. Why do we choose a Brisa? So here again, we don't necessarily have a question on our own as we're reading the Gemara, but it's a question that's on our Gemara that we presented a Brisa instead of a Mishnah, and Tosfos explains to us why. So he's supporting the Gemara and showing us that the Gemara is correct and is doing the right thing by presenting the Brisa over the Mishnah, showing us why the Mishnah was not chosen, and the Brisa in this instance is preferable. In the third part of Tosfos explains that really Rabbi Yehuda is excluded from the Seifa, and what we're excluding from the Reisha is something else. Tosfos shows us that in truth, the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda is excluded from the Seifa, because the Seifa says that one of the examples of Rosh Hashanah is a street that's open at both ends. Now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the street is a Rosh Hashanah, since it's lined with houses. Rabbi Yehuda says that 2 walls creates a Rosh Hashanah. So really, the teaching of Rabbi Yehuda is excluded from the Seifa. So we have a question. What is the Gemara saying? We have the word Zui Rosh Hashanah to exclude the case of Rabbi Yehuda. He's already excluded from the actual cases in the Seifa. So Tosfos explains to us that the Gemara is not really saying that the case of Rabbi Yehuda is excluded from the Reisha, because like we said, it's excluded from the Seifa, but it's rather a mistaken understanding of Rabbi Yehuda that's excluded from the Reisha. So here, this is a more direct support of the Gemara, because without Tosfos, we would be understanding the Gemara incorrectly, that it's telling us that we need the word Zui Rosh Hashanah to exclude Rabbi Yehuda, when that's untrue. We don't need those words. We exclude them already from the Seifa. We're rather excluding a mistaken understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. So here it's a more direct way that we see that Tosfos' goal is to support the Gemara and and explain to us the Gemara and justify what the Gemara is saying. So here he's explained to us what the Gemara means to say. The next Tosfos is on the next part of the Gemara where we said, why does it end with the word Gemura? Zui Rishus Yachid Gemura. We said it's telling us we shouldn't make a mistake and think that the Brisa holds the case of Rabbi Yehuda is not a Rishus Yachid Midrabanan, but Minatayra it is. Gemura tells us it's not a Rishus Yachid whatsoever. Not just it's not Midrabanan, it's not even Rishus Yachid Minatayra. So Tosfos points out a difficulty with the Gemara. He points out that it actually seems to indicate the opposite. When we say Zui Rishus Yachid Gemura, this is a complete Rishus Yachid, the meaning of those words is that this is complete. The other one is not complete, it's only somewhat. And our Gemara is telling us this is a complete Rishus Yachid. That teaches us that this is not a Rishus Yachid whatsoever. So Tosfos points out a difficulty with the Gemara. He also adds that he presents that Rashi B'deichik answers this question. He doesn't like the answer of Rashi, it's B'deichik, but he mentions that Rashi answers it. So here we have Tosfos addressing the Gemara, something that's said in the Gemara, and pointing out that if we read it straightforward in a simple way, it's actually difficult what the Gemara is saying. The next Tosfos is on the Gemara's answer that the reason our Brisa doesn't count the Midbar as the Rishus Rabbim, another Brisa does, is because our Brisa is referring to today, when there isn't a large population in the Midbar, and therefore it's not a Rishus Rabbim. However, the other Brisa is referring to when the Yidden were in the Midbar and there was a large population there. So Tosfos points out that this seems to indicate that a place is only a Rishus Rabbim if it has 600,000 people there. Because why would that Brisa tell us that the Midbar is a Rishus Rabbim if it's not? If it's referring to when the Yidden were in the Midbar, it's not relevant today. Today it's not a Rishus Rabbim. It must be that there's a teaching involved. Tosfos says that it seems that it's telling us that in order to be a Rishus Rabbim, it has to be similar to the way the Midbar was. And what we would learn from the Midbar is that there was 600,000 people there. So Tosfos here points out that this seems to indicate that in order to be a Rishus Rabbim, it's necessary that there should be 600,000 people there. So here Tosfos isn't explaining the Gemara, but he's showing us something that we take out from the Gemara. The next Tosfos is on the next question of the Gemara. The Gemara asked, "B'shegeg chayev chatas pshita." This that if somebody's machal Shabbos through its size chayev a korban chatas, it's obvious. Why did the Brisa need to teach it to us? So Tosfos explains what's the question. Like we pointed out, Rashi learns the question. One way Tosfos learns it differently. So here we see in a very clear way that Tosfos is there to explain the Gemara, that we should understand what the question of the Gemara is. The next Tosfos is on the part of the Gemara where we presented the teaching of Isi ben Yehuda. Originally, we presented the teaching of Isi ben Yehuda that said that there are 39 of us malachas, and a person is only chayev, if he did all 39, is only chayev for one thing. He's only chayev one thing. The Gemara then asked a question on this and concluded that the teaching of Isi ben Yehuda is that there are 39 of us malachas, and a person's chayev for all of them except for one. So over here, there's three parts of Tosfos. First, Tosfos explains that in the Hava Mina of what we understood is the teaching of Isi, he is talking about a chatas. Originally, the Gemara doesn't explain what it's talking about. It just presents the teaching that if a person did all the malachas, he's only chayav one thing. Tosfos explains to us and proves to us that this is referring to an individual who was machal Shabbos b'shegig. And it's saying that if he did all 39 malachas b'shegig, he only brings one korban chatas. Whereas in the Seifa and in the Maskana, he's talking about skila, and the final understanding of the teaching of Isi, that there are 39 of his malachas, and a person's chayav for each and every one of them, except for one. That's referring to when a person did a b'mezid, that he's chayav skila for all the 39 malachas except for one. It's not talking about b'shegig. B'shegig, a person's not chayav he's not chayav for all of them. Besides one, he's chayav for all of them without any exception. So the teaching of Isi is not explained in the Gemara. What it's referring to, Tosfos explains and proves to us that it's saying that a person's chayav skila for all the malachas except for one. So the only exception by skila. And one last part of Tosfos answers a question on the final teaching of Isi. And the final teaching of Isi, that there's one malacha a person's not chayav skila for, Tosfos presents a question on this. We find elsewhere that there's no such thing as a malacha is chayav chatas and not skila. According to Isi, there is. So Tosfos presents this question, addresses it, he answers the question. And the last and final Tosfos is also on this part of the Gemara. It's on the question we asked on Isi. The reason we didn't like the original teaching of Isi, that there are 39 malachas, and a person is only chayav. If he did all 39, he's only chayav one thing. The reason we don't like that teaching is because the Mishnah in Perek Klal Gadol tells us there are 39 of us malachas, and then counts all the malachas. And the Gemara asks, why does it need to tell us the number? Rabbi Yechanan explained that it's telling us the number in order to teach us by saying there are 39 malachas. It's teaching us that if a person did all 39, he'll have to bring 39 chatos. So the Gemara said, how can Isi say that if a person did all 39 malachas, he only brings one chatas? So Tosfos explains that the question on Isi isn't just from the Mishnah in Perek Klal Gadol, because the truth is Isi is allowed to argue on the Mishnah in Perek Klal Gadol. He's able to do that since he's a Tana. Now we could say that we prefer to explain that he doesn't argue. Taisa says it's more than that. It's not just that we prefer to say he doesn't argue or we assume he doesn't argue. The question is much stronger. It's from Isi himself. And like Taisa explains, Isi says there are 39 malachas and a person is only chayev one chatas for all of them. By saying there are 39 malachas, he didn't say for doing all the malachas a person only brings one chatas. He said the number. And we learn from Paraklal Gadol, if the number is used, it teaches us, there are 39 malachas teaches us by using the number 39, that if a person did all 39, he needs to bring 39 chatas. So how could Isi then continue and conclude, and if he did all 39, he only brings one? So Tosfos here is explaining to us the Gemara, that the question in the Gemara is not just from the Mishnah and Prayer Kal Gadol, but it's also a question on Isi from himself. There's an inherent contradiction in the teaching, and that's why the Gemara doesn't like it. So we see over here the general overview of the Gemara, with the Tosfos trying to put an emphasis on how the purpose and goal of Tosfos is really to help us in understanding the Gemara, and it supports and contains the Gemara and explains the Gemara to us.